Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started because I do like to start on time and there's tons of things to cover today. So, hey everybody, how you guys doing? What's going on? Long time.
Hi.
Hi. Hope you all are doing well. So today, you all should be able to see my screen today. And I'm going to go ahead and get started because there's a lot that I want to cover. But the most important thing is I definitely want to cover the changes that we're going to be looking at over the next 4 years. So just a little bit about me. Once again, my name is Tiana Otley. I'm a realtor here in this DC, Maryland area. And basically, my job is to educate people about their options. Oh, hold on one second. Sorry. You guys probably can't see my screen. Let me see. Okay. So basically, my job is to educate people about their options when it comes to investing in real estate. So a little bit about me is that I've been investing in real estate since 2015. And essentially in 2015 is when I bought my first property, and I bought my first property with the intention of turning it into a room rental and doing student rentals. So I was doing furnished rentals, and then from there, I expanded to doing travel rentals to travel nurses. I've also bought properties with the sole intention of turning it into a long-term rental. So I have one tenant who's been in a property since maybe 2017. So I do long-term rentals. I do Section 8 rentals. So I have a couple of Section 8 tenants, and I was able to grow my real estate portfolio using the BRRRR method, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's basically when you buy a property, rehab it, refinance the property, and pull that money back out in order to purchase your next property. So I have a little bit of experience, and I've also done a major rehab, which was just a crazy, crazy experience. Um, so the most important thing is understanding your why in real estate. So for a lot of people, it's going to be a little bit different, but your why is going to kind of determine how you move forward and how you go about investing. So for me, my why was to build a legacy for my family. And that's why I kind of started this Legacy Queen brand to provide educational materials for people who want to learn more about real estate. I'm also super interested in retiring early. So I'm going to do that by using some of the residual income from my rents. And my biggest way of doing that is just buying a number of assets that I can sell later on when I need to. So if I need to sell a property in order to pay for my future kids' college tuition, I'll be able to do that. Or if I need to refinance a property in order to pull out money, I'll be able to do that. So I've been really focused on that. For other people, it may be just entrepreneurship, or they may want to change in their career. And you're going to see in a little bit why real estate could be a good place to kind of park your money, or a good area to start a career in. So during this meeting, we'll be talking about the post-election real estate market update. So my big disclaimer is this meeting is about making money in real estate over the next 4 years. So this workshop is not meant to debate politics, and we're really just going to look at the fiscal policies based on what we're expecting to happen, and we're going to see how we can use that as a real estate to make sure we have a profitable portfolio. So if there's any debate, and then this is just a recorded session where we're kind of talking through things. At the end, I'll stop the recording and then open it up for discussion. But I will pause any type of super political talk, because this is not meant to be about politics. It's really just looking at the fiscal policies that we're going to have over the next 4 years and kind of analyzing how we can use those in order to grow in real estate. All right. Okay, so over the agenda today, we're going to do a super quick rundown of real estate investing strategies. And I say super quick because I have tons of videos on this already that you can use. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, but I'm going to still try to cover all the main topics of real estate investing. Then we're going to dive into how the election has impacted this real estate market. And finally, we're going to talk about our next steps for purchasing real estate properties. So the reason I say super quick is because I have tons of videos, guides, webinars, workbooks, everything available to you all. So you can use this QR code. Also, there's a link in the Zoom notes, and I can drop a link in the chat where you guys can access these resources to all the previous videos that we've done that break down the different aspects of real estate investing. So there are so many different types of real estate investing, a lot of different opportunities out there, from short-term rental to investing in a multi-unit to rentals and flips to wholesaling or hoteling. There's tons of different ideas out there, but most Americans only look at real estate as, hey, I'm going to build wealth by buying a property and I'm just going to live in it. And then after a couple of years, maybe 10 years, 30 years, it's going to appreciate in value. And that's going to be my wealth. That's actually where a lot of Americans hold their wealth, is in their property. So you'll see like people talking about baby boomers who bought a property for $200,000 and is now worth $800,000. And they haven't done a lot of repairs to the property or a lot of renovations and updates. But what has happened is that over the past 30 years or so, or 25 years, the property has just appreciated in value. So that's just the most common way that people build wealth in America. But if you want to take it a step further, you can go into different types of investing strategies, such as you can do the midterm rentals, long-term rentals. You can do rehabilitations, meaning renovating a property and selling it for a property. Or if you don't want to do any type of renovation repairs, you can do turnkey properties. So you buy a property that's already been renovated, or you buy a property that's just move-in ready. Or you can do vacant rentals. So you buy a property and there's no furniture in the property. So you're renting out to a family who's going to add their own furniture. Or you can do furnished rentals where you're placing the furniture in the property so that you can rent it either short term, or you can do it by the room, which is one of my favorite strategies, by the room. You can house hack the property, meaning you live in one portion of the property and rent out the other. You can do it in the state, out of state. And then we're going to talk a little bit about wholesaling and hoteling a little later on when we're talking about some of the strategies. But the major two big buckets of real estate investing is, number one, you either buy a property with the intent of selling it, or number two, you buy a property with the intent of holding on to it long term. So you're going to buy and hold, which basically means you're going to probably be renting that property out so that it makes money over the long term. So when we look at buy and hold strategies, there's two major buckets for buy and hold strategies. Number one is I'm buying and holding a property so that I can collect the cash flow. Or number two is I want to build equity. Ideally, you kind of want to do both. You want to collect cash flow and you want to build equity, but it may be harder to cash flow in this market since the prices of properties are so high. So at the very least, you want to make sure you're able to build equity in the long run. So let's look at cash flow in terms of real estate investing. The very simple definition of cash flow is income minus expenses. So all the monthly rent that I get minus all the expenses that I have to pay. So if I'm renting out a property that's $1,900 a month for rent and I have to pay $1,600 a month in expenses, then my cash flow is $300 a month. And when I say expenses, I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about your mortgage, which is your principal, interest, your taxes, your insurance. I'm talking about your operating expenses. So your maintenance, if you need to save money to fix a toilet or to fix a furnace or to change out a water heater. I'm talking about capital expenditure, so saving money in order to replace, like fully replace a furnace, or even to redo the roof, setting aside money for management. All those things have to be in your expense category in order to really understand your cash flow. And what some people do is they basically say like, hey, like I want to cash flow at least $300 a month on one property. Okay, that's great. $300 a month, that's about $3,000 a year. Multiplying it by 10 with the idea that maybe you have 2 months of vacancy. But let's say, and also 10 is a super easy number to multiply by. So you're saying, okay, I'll make an extra $3,000 a year from this property, right? That's great, but what most people are trying to do is they're trying to make enough money from their cash flow in order to cover their monthly expenses. So they do that through what we call economies of scale, meaning the more properties I have, the more I can cash flow. So if I have making $300 a month on one property, if I end up having 10 properties, then 300 times 10 means I'm making $3,000 a month from all of my properties, and that's pure cash flow. And then over the year, I'm making around $30,000 a year. So you may look at your expenses and say, like, okay, well, my monthly living expenses are around 2,500. So that's all I need in order to be able to quit my job if I want to. So this is my minimum requirement. So that's the cash flow idea, especially when it comes to retirement. That's why some people buy a number of properties in order to use that cash flow in order to cover their retirement. Um, Now, let's look at how we understand equity when it comes to real estate investing. So equity is essentially the value of a property going up over time. So basically you have what you bought the property for minus how much the property is worth now. So say you bought a property, the property was listed for $250,000. You did a 7% down payment. So you put down $17,500. That means your mortgage is 232. When I say a property, this is probably a condo in DC. So your mortgage is $232,500. Right now, you already have equity of $17,500. That's the equity that you bought when you purchased the property, right? This is your down payment. So you bought this equity in this property. Now, where we're looking at is if your house is going to appreciate. So on average in the United States, homes appreciate 3 to 5% per year. So let's just take an average of 4%. If we have a property that's worth $250,000 and homes appreciate on average 4% every year, that means by next year, that 250 property will be worth $260,000. That's a $10,000 increase, right? And that's just on average what properties do in America based upon the American economy. Things get more expensive. The cost of bread is going to be more expensive. The cost of gas is going to be much more expensive. Everything, like, it's basically how inflation impacts the market. So if I say that I want to be a millionaire in 10 years, then I would take a look at this and say, like, okay, if these properties are appreciating around 4%, and I have a $250,000 property, that's $10,000, then I would need at least 10 properties in order to get $100,000. And if I'm looking at the 10-year time span, then $100,000 a year, which is all 10 of my properties, up slowly appreciating 4% every year. So $100,000 per year times 10 years, so I let 10 years go by, means I'm going to have at least $1 million worth of equity in these properties. And that's without me doing anything. So a lot of people choose, like, okay, I'm just going to buy one property a year, or maybe I'm going to buy two properties a year for 5 years, or maybe I'll buy one property every other year. And their goal is to get to 10 so that they can eventually retire a millionaire. So real estate is the number one way that people build wealth in America. And it's also a super common way of where people store their wealth. So if people are already making a lot of money, they'll park their wealth in an asset like real estate because they know at the very least they'll get a 4% appreciation. And when you're looking at this appreciation rate, this is across the United States. Certain markets, like tertiary markets or the smaller markets, are going to appreciate more. So for instance, you may find that Washington, D.C. is appreciating at 7% a year in comparison to Baltimore, which is still at 4%. Or you may find that LA appreciates at 10% a year in comparison to a place in Iowa that appreciates 2%. So we have to really consider the markets, but this is just on average. So these are our two common ways of investing in real estate. Number one is if we're looking at buy and hold real estate, are we looking at the opportunity to do a cash flow deal where we're using residual income in order to cover our expenses? Or we're looking at equity and basically using this equity in the future to either, you could pay for college tuition, you can use it to retire, you can cash out these properties in order to buy your dream house on a lake somewhere for cash, but you're basically using that to create wealth for the future. Okay, so we talked about our two buckets for investing. So first was buy and hold. The second option is to do buy, then selling a property. So you can also choose to buy a property and sell it. The simplest way of thinking about it is flipping a property. So you guys hear people say this all the time. I'm going to flip properties. Simply put, you buy low, sell high, right? Just like the stock market, you buy low, sell high. So a couple of options that you have. First, you can buy a fixer upper and renovate the property quickly and then sell it quickly. That's typically what we think. We think like, oh, there's this property I found. All I need to do is put a little work into it and I can turn around and sell it immediately. That's typically what we think of when we think of flipping. However, another option is to buy a fixer upper, fix it up, rent that property out, and then after your renters move out, just make the final repairs in the property because the renters are going to do some wear and tear, and then sell it. So you're still buying it with the intent to sell it, but you're going to rent it out in the meantime. A good example of why you would do this is maybe you buy a property in June and you fix it up. By the time it's fixed up, it's already the winter market, right? And you're like, nobody really wants to buy a property in the wintertime. I know that the best time to sell a property is in the spring and summer because so many people are outside and that's a great time to sell it. So maybe I'll rent it out for 6 months to travel nurses or rent it out by the room, or I'll rent it to a family for 6 months and then go ahead and sell it. Now, keep in mind when you're using a strategy, it's going to be different depending on where you are. So in Maryland, you can do a 6-month lease and then ask your tenant to move out at the end of that lease. In DC, if you allow a tenant to move into a property, even if the lease is for 30 days or 6 months or a year, that tenant legally has the right to remain in that property forever. Like you can't ask them to move out just because it's the end of their lease. So I want you guys to keep that in mind when considering where you want to buy properties, because there's certain states and certain areas that have more landlord friendly laws and other areas have more tenant friendly laws. And then the third example is when you're buying a fixer upper and you personally are going to live in that property for a year and you're just going to slowly fix it up. So I'm going to live there for a year. I want to slowly fix it up. And then at the end of that time, when I finally fix the property up, I'm going to go ahead and sell that property, right? This is a super safe bet because you already need somewhere to live, right? So maybe I'll just buy something that needs some work. I'll paint myself. I got a painting quote the other day for a house that was $6,000, right? Okay, if I live in that property, I can paint one room a week. And then that saves me $6,000 and I have a place to stay. Or I can get someone to come and do the plumbing slowly. Maybe I'll start with this bathroom, that bathroom. So that could be a way that some people use. Like you still intend to sell this property, but you're going to live in it while you flip the property. All right. When we're thinking about flipping properties, the main thing that you want to do is add value to the property. So you can actually look at studies online to see like what renovations provide the most value to a property. So one option is just to let the property appreciate over time. So as I mentioned, on average, properties appreciate 3 to 5% every year. So you can just say like, okay, I'm just going to hold on to this property and I just had a child. So in 18 years, I know that this property is going to appreciate 4% every single year. So in 18 years, I'll be able to sell this property and pay for my child's tuition. That is one option. Or I know I'm going to retire in 20 years. So I'm just going to buy this property. And then in 20 years, I can sell the property or refinance it. That's an option as well. You can also do what we call forced appreciation. When you force appreciation, you're basically doing work to make the value of the property go up. So you may take a 3-bedroom property and turn it into a 4-bedroom property. That was actually my very first property that I didn't house hack, that was just a rental property. It had a den with 2 egress doors. It had a bathroom attached to it. It just didn't have a closet. So I literally just needed to build a closet. And then I was able to, instead of renting that house as a 3-bedroom house, I was able to rent it as a 4-bedroom house, right? So I'm increasing the value of the property because now I can sell it as a 4-bedroom property versus the 3-bedroom property. You can convert a garage into another space. Like if you're in an area where garages aren't common, but people seem to need more interior space, like, okay, I can turn this garage into another living area. You can finish a basement. So there's a lot of properties that have unfinished basements, and you can just do the work to add the framing and the drywall, electrical, plumbing, and finish the basement. or you can add a bathroom. One of my favorite strategies is to find properties with half bathrooms and then turn that half bathroom into a full bathroom just by adding a shower. So I tap into the existing plumbing and I add a shower. I push the wall out a little bit, and now I have another full bathroom. And then based upon what buyer demand is, you could choose to open up the kitchen. A lot of people like these open concept spaces. So they have some studies that show that when you create that open concept look and make a house seem more modern, you're able to sell that property for a little bit more. All right. So that was the quick and dirty of real estate investing strategies, right? Now let's take a look at what's happening in the real estate market. And the reason why we went through that stuff so quickly is because you guys already have the video recording, so you can go back in, or you can slow this recording down and replay it later. But let's understand what's happening in this real estate market post-election. So historically speaking, home sales typically slow down the fall. That's just normal, right? Regardless of the election, in the fall and the winter, home sales slow down. In the spring and the summer is when they're popping, right? So as I think of it like this, because in this area where we have 4 seasons, as it gets colder, less people want to be out looking at homes, less people want to sell their homes. When it gets warmer, more people want to be out looking at homes, more people want to sell their homes, people are ready to move. Even in the summertime, the school year's over, so families may want to move during the summertime to not interrupt their students during the school year. So just historically speaking, in the fall, home sales typically slow down. But specifically with regards to the election, it slows down because people are nervous about the election. So instead of like buying a property, they kind of want to see what's going to happen first with the presidential election before they buy that property. And then after the election is over, then people can get back to their normal spending habits. You can take a look at this graph right here and see that almost every year since 1978, the year after election, home prices went up. So 9 of the last 11 presidential elections, home sale prices went up. The only times that it didn't go up was in the 1980 and the 1988 election. I don't know why, because that's before my time. But typically home sales tend to go up. So that's also something to consider, is that if you know home sales are going to go up, then maybe you want to get in on those properties now because you're expecting them to go up in the near future. Now let's look at the prices. Prices are pretty resilient. They go up year over year, right? That's the appreciation we're talking about. That's very natural. So home prices went up after 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, right? So the only time in this past, since 1989, the only time that home prices did not go up after election was, you guys already know what it was, 2008 housing crisis. So that was an anomaly. It was probably one of the biggest crashes that impacted our economy, and specifically the housing economy. So that was just a fluke. But on average, you can see that prices tend to go up after an election. And then also we just have a much stronger market today. So people aren't expecting another 2008 crisis to happen just because of some of the safeguards that have been put into place since then. So let's take a look at mortgage rates. So typically mortgage rates tend to drop right before an election, right? And we've seen that. They're like, oh, like right before, a month before the election, the Fed is dropping rates. Like we've seen that. That's because they want to make you happy as a voter. Anyone who's in office is going to want to make you happy as a voter, and they want you to feel optimistic so that they can get your votes in general. So just keep in mind that that tends to happen. The forecasts believe that the mortgage rates will ease specifically for the rest of the year. Like we're still expecting one more rate decrease by the end of the year. But keep in mind that we are at historic lows since the 1980s. So in the 1980s, the average interest rate was around 13%, right? 14% in 1984, 1988, 10%. So it was only in 2016, 2020, 2012 that we got down to these 3% rates. That's what everyone is trying to get back down to, but that's not typical, you know? So keep that in mind, that it's not typical to see rates that low. But we did see it, and it's really because we had this huge pandemic, and they were trying to incentivize money to continue to flow. So to incentivize money to continue to flow, they lowered the interest rates to get more people to spend their money. All right. So now experts aren't really projecting a huge drop. They think it may continue to decline slowly. But there's going to be, and you're going to see in a little bit, there's going to be a couple of things that will impact that. When rates are low, that means houses are more affordable for people to buy. But that also means that there's a lot more buyers out there, and we'll see what impact that has in a second. Okay. This election specifically was important because each party had different ideas of what they wanted to do. The prevailing party is very big on pro-business, right? So you can see lots of businesses that invested, and I challenge you to actually look at those businesses that contributed to different campaigns, because you're going to see those are the benefits, those are the businesses that are going to benefit. But there's going to be we're expecting lots of pro-business policies, and because of that, is going to increase investor activity. So for instance, there may be tax cuts, right? Like if you're a business, you may not have to pay as much taxes, which means that I'm going to spend more money as a business, right? So those are policies that I'm thinking of. Another thing was the preservation of the 1031 exchange, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. This campaign wants to keep interest rates low, and also there's going to be tons of tax incentives. So over the next 4 years, the biggest thing to consider about real estate, and this is why I love being in real estate, is that over 200 members of Congress own real estate. So Congress, a lot of them are landlords. So what does that tell you? That means that they're traditionally going to pass policies that are going to benefit them as real estate investors. So that helps us be able to take advantage of those same policies that benefit us as real estate investors. So that's a huge thing when people are like, oh, everything bad is going to happen with real estate. Like, keep in mind that these Congress members, they own real estate, and they largely park their wealth in real estate. For the next 4 years, we're no longer expecting a change in capital gains tax. There was a plan during one of the campaigns to tax unrealized gains, but because Trump won the election, that's not his plan. He doesn't want to touch capital gains taxes, which means we're still going to see the benefits of that. If unrealized gains were taxed, that would mean, like, say you bought a property for $300,000, and now that same property is worth $500,000, there's $200,000 worth of equity in that property. You would be taxed on that $200,000 worth of equity, even though you haven't sold the property yet. So that was one of the things that were on the market, with the idea that that money will be used for other things, but that's no longer on the table. Another thing that we'll see in the next 4 years is the preservation of the 1031 exchange. So there were talks that that would be eliminated, but because the new president-elect is super pro-business, he wants to keep the 1031 exchange. You got to think he owns a lot of real estate as well, so he wants to keep the 1031 exchange. So what is that? So the 1031 exchange is basically this idea that when you sell real estate, instead of paying taxes on the sale of that asset, like capital gains tax on the sale of that asset, you can use the proceeds of your sale to buy another real estate property so that you don't have to pay taxes right now. So if I bought a property for $200,000, it's now worth $300,000. I sold it. Instead of me paying taxes on that extra $100,000 profit, I can use that $100,000 to buy a new real estate investment property, and that way I don't have to pay taxes on it now. Now, in the future, if you sell that new property, then yeah, you have to pay taxes. But the idea is that you would just keep doing this forever. You would just never sell your properties, keep doing this forever. So this idea that we can defer capital gains tax by reinvesting our proceeds is going to remain. And then both parties were talking a lot about boosting housing supply. So that was always going to stay the same regardless of who was elected. But think about this. More housing supply means that theoretically there's going to be more affordable homes because you're increasing the supply. If the demand remains the same, you increase the supply, you basically reduce the price, right? Because now it's fewer people competing for the same properties. When the supply is low, a lot of people are competing for the same property, and that's what's going to create bidding wars and the prices of things to go up. So we're really going to be looking at how are they actually boosting this housing supply. So during the campaign, there was major talks about cracking down on immigration and this mass deportation policy. So essentially how that's going to impact the housing market is that a lot of construction labor is from foreign-born immigrants. Not sure whether or not they're undocumented or documented, but a lot of construction labor is from foreign-born immigrants. And if there is mass deportation, that may reduce the amount of people that are available to build the properties, and that means housing costs will go up, right? One of the issues that was brought up is that that's cheap labor. That means that anything that's replacing that cheap labor is going to be more expensive. And if it's more expensive to buy a house, to build a house, that means it's going to be more expensive to buy a house, right? So that's going to impact things as well. Another goal of the campaign was to increase the development and reduce unnecessary permitting and building regulations targeting housing developers. So this makes it easier and cheaper for builders to buy homes. So I went through a whole process, and dealing with the permitting office can be slow, and it's also super expensive because you pay for permits for everything. Like literally they'll come in and say they want a unicorn in this room, and you have to pay for a permit to put a unicorn in the room. I'm making that up, but still, like all those different permitting regulations make it super hard for developers to be able to quickly knock out these homes. And the idea of the next 4 years is that they're going to reduce those regulations. That makes it easier for developers to make more and more homes quickly. And that means that if they're able to build homes for cheaper, they're not paying as much in permits. They're not paying as much in time, right? Because you can spend 6 weeks waiting for a permit to come through when nothing's happened on the property and you're still paying the mortgage on the property. So it's going to save time. It's going to save money. That means ideally properties will be cheaper. Both campaigns were talking about making federal lands available for housing development. So there's about 20 to 30% of America that is owned by the federal government. The idea is for the federal government to sell that land to developers so that developers can build communities, whether they're building housing communities, apartment communities, but that could increase the supply of properties available. And then, of course, Trump is really, really big on trying to lower the mortgage rates. Now, generally speaking, the president does not control mortgage rates, but there are things he can do to put pressure on the Federal Reserve in order to kind of encourage them to control the mortgage rates. So we're going to see what's going to happen. This basically means that houses are going to be more affordable. But once I said, if the houses are more affordable, then more people want to buy. If more people want to buy, you're going to have more bidding wars, which means the price of the house will go up. So it's literally like two sides of the same coin. Like you want the houses to be cheaper, but are they actually going to be cheaper if more people can now afford it to get in the game? That means you're competing against more people. So you need to offer more in the property in order to secure the property that you really want. Okay. So let's go into one of the biggest things, capital gains tax. So huge disclaimer, I'm not a tax advisor. So if you need advice, consult with a licensed CPA. This information is for informational purposes only. I am a real estate investor and I basically research tax policies in order to figure out how I can use the tax law to my benefit. So I'm just a licensed realtor. And basically that means I help people buy and sell real estate, and I want them to be informed about their different options. But like I said, if you have specific questions or don't take this as advice, go to your licensed CPA because they can basically break down what you need for your specific situation. All right. Federal tax brackets came out a couple of days ago. This should look familiar to everyone because theoretically everybody pays taxes. So as a single person making around $50,000 a year, you're in the 22% tax bracket, right? So everyone pays taxes on their W-2 income. That's just a normal thing. And these are federal taxes. When we look at capital gains tax, capital gains is slightly different than your W-2. So W-2 is, think of that as like your 9-to-5 job. Capital gains is an asset that you sell. So if I own a property and I sell it for a profit, that's capital gains. If I own stock and I bought the stock for $3 a share and I'm selling it for $5 a share, then that's capital gains. So capital gains is only for the asset, it's not for your W-2 income. So currently, the IRS guidelines are that for short-term capital gains, this is profits made after holding an asset for less than 1 year, right? Those are taxed as ordinary income. And as you just saw, ordinary income is taxed anywhere from the 10% rate up to the 37% rate. Now, if you're going to do a long-term hold, so long-term capital gains, which is profits made after holding an asset for at least a year, those are taxed at a specific tax rate. 0%, 15%, or 20%. All right. So if I buy a property and I fix it up and I sell it in 3 months, I'm taxed at my ordinary tax bracket. If I buy a property, fix it up, rent it out for a year in a day, and I sell it, I'm only taxed at either 0%, 15%, or 20%. So short-term strategy, fix and flip. This is what everyone wants to do because it seems like it's easier money and it's a shorter way to make more money. So option A, say you convince an owner to sell you their property off market for less than what it's worth. You market it well and you sell it for profit. So you don't even have to do work to do a flip, basically. This is really what wholesalers do. But sometimes wholesalers do the marketing and to off-market buyers, but sometimes people can do that just because they have a competitive advantage, such as knowing people. So Daryl's sister Margaret, she's turning 85 and she's like, baby, I want you to take this house from me. She wants to sell it to you for 300,000. She bought it for 100,000. She's just trying to go to the nursing home. It's worth 500,000. So you're able to negotiate with her, get the property off market, and then basically you sell that property for a profit. That's not doing any work. That's basically you using your marketing skills to get a seller to sell you their property off market. Why? Because if they sell it on market, then other people are going to see the value. They're going to be like, oh, this house is actually worth 500,000. So even though they're selling it for 300, I'm going to offer more because I really want to get this property. Option B is to buy a property for less than what it's worth. So that's typically a fixer-upper. You fix the property up, so do the renovation, and then you sell it for a profit as soon as possible. If you do these two options, which is less than a year, you're going to be taxed at this regular tax bracket. So look at your W-2 income, and this is what you're going to be taxed at. So if I make $627,000 a year, Father God, I'm claiming that, then I'm going to be taxed at 37% tax bracket on that capital gain. All right. So long-term strategy, I buy a property, I wait at least a year for it to naturally appreciate. So I don't even do any work to it. I just wait a year. Maybe I just live in it for a year, buy a property, live in it for a year, wait for it to grow the 4%, and then go ahead and sell it. Buy another property, live in it for a year, wait for it to grow, and then sell it, right? That's a long-term flip option. Also, you could buy a property for less than it's worth, fix it up. You can rent it out for a year. And then after the renters move out, you can do the after rental repairs for the maintenance from the wear and tear, and then sell it for a profit. So that's an option as well. If you wait a year and a day, so at least a year, if you sell it on a year and a day, then you only are paying into these three tax brackets, right? So tax bracket number one, if you make less than $48,000, you don't pay any taxes on that property, on that capital gains, right? That's great. If you make anywhere from 48 to 533, you're paying 15%. If you make over $533,000 a year, then you're paying 20%. This 20% is way less than that 37% before. This 15% is less than the 22% that we saw from the regular tax bracket, for the regular federal tax brackets. So this is the benefit of holding the property long-term, which means 1 year, before you sell a property. All right. There are no benefits for holding it for 10 years in comparison to 1 year. No, it's just anything that's over 1 year, you qualify for this long-term capital gains tax bracket. So let's look at a little comparison. So we have a single person earning $70,000 a year from a W-2 job. And they're able to sell a property that they bought in the past for $30,000 gross profit. So they're going to sell the investment property for, and they're going to make $30,000 on it. The short-term flip is that if they sell it within, if they bought the property and sold it before 365 days, so in less than a year, whether it be 1 month, 9 months, 11 months, if they anything less than a year, they will be taxed at this 22% short-term capital gains rate. So that means they would have to pay $6,600 in federal taxes. That's just federal. That's not even state. So this is just federal. Long-term flip is that if they had the same property, same scenario, but they held this property for at least a year, then they're only taxed, because they're making $70,000 a year, they're only taxed at the 15% tax capital gain, 15% long-term capital gains tax rate. So that's $4,500 in federal taxes. All right. So by waiting a year, in this case, because the profit was $30,000, they're saving $2,100. So they're saving 7% in capital gains tax. That could be a major benefit. Or if that, instead of that $30,000, instead it was $300,000, because maybe they were doing a big project, then this number could move drastically. But now you need to figure out your carrying costs, because you waited a year, which means that you had to pay the mortgage on that property for a year. You had to pay for maintenance for the year. You had to pay utilities for the year. And if you weren't renting that property out, then you're basically eating that cost. And so if that cost is not less than this $2,100, then you really didn't save by holding on to that property for more than a year. Now, the pro to that is that during that 1 year that you're waiting to save this 7% in taxes, you can actually rent that property out and make additional rental income. So that's actually the strategy that I like, is getting the property, updating it, whether it be adding the additional bathroom or adding an additional bedroom. And then I'm going to do two things. I'm going to list it for sale and for rent at the same time, right? And I'm going to see which happens first. If I get a good renter in there, I'll rent it for a year. If that renter is horrible, then after the end of the year, I'm like, thank God they're leaving. I'm going to go ahead and sell this. Or if that renter is great, I'm like, yeah, you can stay another year. Yeah, in another year, because I'm theoretically, if it's a great rental, then I'm cash flowing on that property. And I know that I can sell this property in the future. All right. But because it's over a year, I automatically am now only going to be taxed at the long-term capital gains rate versus at my ordinary income. All right. So this is an oversimplified example of federal tax rates. You're still going to have to pay state taxes, and state taxes vary by state. All right. So next steps as an investor is to figure out how aggressive you want to be. So we know that this next administration is going to be super pro-business, which means pro-real estate. And that means like curbing a lot of the creating tax incentives for investors. And we like that. As real estate investors, we do like that. So now we need to figure out, if we want to start investing in real estate, how aggressive do we want to be? So you can choose the lower risk options, which is buy and hold. That's that long term, right? Anytime you do something on the long-term basis, you're mitigating risks, right? Because if you're putting all your eggs in one basket for a quick 3-month period, then things can go wrong easily. But if you have the time to wait, you have the time to allow the property to grow in value. House hacking is a really common low-risk strategy because you already need a place to live. So house hacking basically means that you live in one part of the property and you rent out the other. That means you live in the basement, you rent out the bedrooms. You live in one room, you rent out your second room. You live in a 4-unit property, you live in one of the apartments, and you rent out the other 3. All right. Another lower risk option is a live and flip. So you buy a fixer-upper and then you live in it while you slowly renovate the property over time. And another lower risk option is just buying a turnkey property. Like, I don't want to do any renovations. I'm not trying to deal with the permitting process. I'm not trying to deal with any crazy contractors. I'm going to buy a property that's already renovated, ready to go. I'm going to close on the property and I'm going to put it for rent the next day, right? So that's a lower risk option. I do a lot of the moderate risk option, which is you buy a property that needs some work. And what you're going to do is rehab that property. So you're going to renovate that property, update it, painting, maybe new flooring, maybe update the fixtures, get someone to check on the plumbing, the electrical. And then after you do those updates, you're going to rent the property out. By the time you do that, you've updated the property. That when you updated the property, you created equity, you created value. So now the property is worth more. Then you rent the property out. So you're showing the mortgage company that this is actually a good asset because it's being rented out. Now you can go ahead and refinance the property and take out more money. So for instance, like buy a property, 175,000, you put $25,000 into it to renovate it. So now you're into the property 200,000, but maybe the property, because you put that money in, other properties in the area are selling for 230,000. So now you have that additional equity. You can refinance and get some of your money back, and then use that money that you got back in order to buy the next property. So this is how you just create this kind of cycle of being able to just repeat this process over and over again with the same funds, because you're using the same funds that you use to buy the property and rehab it. You're going to refinance that property later to get that money back and then do the process over and over again. So this is moderate because it does include some of the buy and hold investing. But whenever you're repeating the process, you're taking on another asset, which is another roof to fix, another hot water heater, another furnace. So it's going to be more risk. Now, the higher risk options are flipping, right? Flipping the property. There's so many properties that I see of people who started renovations and they just ran out of money, right? And I'm an example of contractors will try anything to take your money and not do what they're supposed to do. So some people like, oh, the contractor told me it was $30,000. They said 50% up front. So I gave them $15,000 and I haven't heard from them since. Flipping is super risky. That's why the live and flip, like that long-term flip option, is less risky because you could take your time and do smaller projects over time. But when you're taking a property and you're just renovating the whole property at the same time, it's more money up front and it's more risky. But with flipping is high risk, high reward. So you can lose big or you can make a lot of money. Development, of course, is risky. Development is just flipping times 10. So development, think more so of like you're gutting it down to the bones. And also think of development as large scale, meaning you're doing a whole block. You're building basically a whole neighborhood. Syndications is super risky because of the fact that with a syndication, you're basically giving your money to a fund and they're using that money to invest in real estate. Now, granted, you can vet the fund. It can be really lucrative. You can get 10% returns on your money, but you are not in control of that money. At least with these other examples, you still own the house, right? So even if you have bad tenant, once that tenant's out, you still own the house. You can sell the house for money, right? In syndications, you don't own anything. You're basically giving your money to this fund and they're investing it, and you're hoping and praying that they're lucrative and they make money. Another high risk investment is retail, like commercial space. And when I say commercial, I'm mainly talking about like retail and office space. As we saw during the pandemic, you can go from everyone being in the office to not needing an office real fast. So remote work, like if a company feels like they're successful with all remote workers, they no longer need office space. And some office, like commercial spaces, take 3 to 5 years just to refill that space. Like they're long leases, but if that property goes vacant, it can take a long time to fill that property. You know, everyone always needs a residential place to stay. People need a place to put their family, so you can get your property rented out in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. But for a commercial space, that can be 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. And then pre-construction speculative investments, that's high risk as well. So when people say like, hey, we're going to build this community over here, we're just trying to raise money for it, that's always risky. And then there's tons of examples, even online, of famous big name Instagram people who took in a lot of people's money. And then next thing you know, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we're bankrupt. We don't have it. So you're basically giving money to them with the idea that they're going to do this thing. They gave you a good plan, but you don't know if it's going to happen. But like I said, high risk, high reward, because if the plan follows through, then you could make a lot of money. So for these, I say for higher risk, be prepared to lose that money. Be prepared to, when you put that money aside, you only put money into high risk investments that you are okay with losing. So this should not be money that you need to feed your kids. It should not be money that you need to pay your bills. This is additional money that you're putting to the side in order to do this. Otherwise, stay in this area, lower risk to moderate risk, when you're doing investing. Prior to investing, make sure you have your 6-month emergency fund and steady income. So I've heard people say like, hey, I want to invest in real estate. I want to invest. I don't have a job yet, but I was thinking about getting into real estate investing. And I'm like, well, you need a job to buy property. Like the bank is going to ask for your W-2 or they're going to ask for your tax returns. So you need to have some sort of income. Having steady income is what gets you through the rough times. It gets you through, like this week alone, I've had 3 properties where the furnace went out. For some reason, one property is the igniter, another property, I don't know what it is. Another property, I don't even know. But 3 properties in 1 week and the furnace went out. You have to have some sort of funds in order to cover that. So you want to have your emergency fund, and this is your emergency fund for you. So this is based upon your own monthly expenses. So your housing costs, grocery costs, childcare, things like that. You want to have 6 months of that saved up. In addition to that, you're saving additional funds specifically for investments. So don't take your 6-month emergency fund and be like, oh, I can use it as a down payment. No, that 6-month emergency fund, matter of fact, put it in a different bank account. Don't even look at it. That's just your emergency to make sure you are good. Your additional funds is specifically for your investments. That's what you're going to use in order to buy property. You understand the pros and cons of using other people's money. So other people's money is a lot of times going to be the mortgage, your lender. So if you're only putting down 3.5%, that means the lender is putting down the other 96.5%. Is that math right? So you have to understand the pros and cons. A pro of using other people's money is that you can buy more properties, right? If I have $100,000 in cash and I buy one property cash that's $100,000, that's great. I now have one property and it's completely paid off and it's worth $100,000. Or if I have $100,000 cash, I can break that up into $20,000 down payments on 5 different properties. So now, because I use $80,000 worth of loans for each property, that's other people's money, I essentially am able to buy more properties with the same amount of money, right? But now I have these mortgages I have to pay on the property every single month. So you have to understand the pros and cons of using other people's money. Make sure you're analyzing properties on a regular basis so that you can know if the property is even going to cash flow. That's going to be super big because you don't want to buy, unless you're buying strategically because you have a lot of money and you just need to buy a tax write-off. And if you're if you're making that type of money, then some people are so successful that they need to show losses on their tax returns, or they need to buy assets, whether or not the assets are cash flowing on their tax return, right? So they're like, I have so much money, I'm going to end up paying this much in taxes, so I need to buy some real estate properties just so that I can reduce the amount that I'm taxed on, right? Those are the only people who can afford to not cash flow, because even with cash flow, I don't even use a lot of that cash flow. I tend to reinvest that cash flow into real estate anyway. But you need to know how to analyze properties to figure out if it's going to cash flow. If your mortgage is $1,800 a month, how much do you need to rent that property out for in order to cash flow, right? So analyze properties regularly and then determine what market you want to be in, right? When you're studying your markets, you really want to look at markets that are going to appreciate in value, right? So I really like DC and areas that touch DC, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, all the Northern Virginia counties, they're already super expensive, so it can be a little bit unaffordable, but I like these areas specifically. Now, properties in Baltimore are way cheaper. They're not going to appreciate as quickly as DC, right? Like I have a property under contract in Baltimore. It's a 4-bedroom property under contract for $180,000, 4-bedroom townhouse, right? Tell me if you can find a 4-bedroom townhouse in DC or Prince George's County, Montgomery County for $180,000. No, you can't. But I bought that property for $70,000. So it's appreciated great for Baltimore, but it's not up to the 300. I think that same property right now in PG County and like maybe Suitland District Heights would go for like $350,000. So it's not appreciating at the same rate. So figure out what market you want to be in so you know where to focus your analysis. And then finally, you're going to make sure you educate yourself. There are tons of books out there. I have tons of videos available. There's tons of YouTube videos available. So figure out a ways to educate yourself, read books, do audibles, listen to podcasts, come to workshops, or you can work with a mentor who's going to guide you through this process. So once again, I have tons of resources available to you all. I have all of for the most part, most of my videos are available on my website, where you can rewatch it, pause it, take notes, listen to it. I know I talk fast sometimes, so if you need to pause it and go back, you can do that. And then I also have guides available as well, so that if you need to just kind of use a worksheet for yourself, or if you want to like analyze a property and you just need help doing it, you want to write it down versus doing it on the computer, you can do that as well. All right. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the recording.